government is determined to protect more of what's precious, to repair more of what's damaged, and to manage nature better for our kids and grandkids.
It's going to take a lot of work to get there.
Environment Minister Tanya Plibersek has been busy since Labor won last year's federal election. There have been lots of positive environmental announcements.
A more ambitious plan. It includes a target of 0 new extinctions.
But to her critics, too many announcements involving the approval of coal mines.
This government has approved 3 new coal and gas projects in Australia.
Why is Labor approving new coal mines in the middle of a climate emergency?
A signature policy, however, is now before federal parliament.
This bill will establish a new nature repair market in Australia, the first of its kind in the world.
There are already a lot of private sector investment schemes, as well as state government schemes, that aim to support habitat and wildlife in Australia. But
if we are serious about this goal, a large part of our work has to be on private land, because more than 60% of our country's land mass is in private hands.
the proposed new federal scheme aims to set up a national system for trading biodiversity credits, a bit like carbon credits, and one with a clear system of measurement and accountability. But there are plenty of critics of the extent to which these schemes actually deliver real, measurable, large-scale improvements.
Well, the Nature Repair Market Bill is a really important way of ensuring that when we see additional private sector investment and additional philanthropic investment in the environment, that it's high quality, that it's verifiable, that we can track it, that we can trace it, that it's got good science behind it.
The best way to think about biodiversity credits is that people would be paid to not only conserve existing biodiversity, but to improve that biodiversity over time.
The concept of biodiversity credits is not entirely new.
The early stage of the biodiversity in the market was really around very specific kinds of offset programs, and we have different schemes in each state. We're now evolving beyond that, and we're really starting to think about how we make something scalable, fungible, and how we actually get landscape level change and impact. And that's a really significant change.
James Schultz is the chief executive of a private sector company that trades in both carbon and biodiversity credits.
There are some really important lessons to be learned from what has worked and what hasn't worked in the carbon space. What does work is lots of transparency and focus on measurement.
And there is also the question of whether there is enough demand for these credits to fundamentally change the landscape.
I think what you're finding is a lot of organisations, large corporations, they're actually starting to think ahead of the curve here.
We know that people are prepared to pay for this. London Stock Exchange is looking for biodiversity credits, prepared to spend billions, if not trillions of dollars in this space. Huge opportunities if we have the right science and good monitoring to make it go somewhere. We need three kinds of monitoring. We need compliance monitoring to see whether or not somebody actually did what they said they were going to do. We need input monitoring to make sure that the money that they received was actually spent the right way. And we need what's called outcomes monitoring to see what the biodiversity dividend was from those interventions and investments.
One way to drive more private investment is to force companies to buy the credits as offsets to compensate for developments that damage habitat, which is how the New South Wales scheme works.
If you're relying on offsets, well, that's problematic because with an offset-driven market, your first point is to sort of mitigate loss, but it presents challenges because you're often intervening in landscapes that are of high quality and then trying to replace that with something that may be of lesser quality. And you're still relying on development, new development that is impacting existing habitat to drive your source of demand.
The legislation for the new scheme was introduced into Parliament in late March. Nationals leader David Littleproud initially declared the legislation was a carbon copy of a scheme he had championed. But just a couple of months later, the Coalition flagged concerns with the bill, particularly how it applies to oceans and whether the whole thing should wait until separate reforms to national environment laws are finalised.
There are many questions about the legislation the government have before us that remain unanswered, unintended consequences that we think need to be dealt with.
The bill to track private investment in conservation, dubbed Green Wall Street, was also rubbished by the Greens, who argue the scheme would enable, quote, dodgy offsets and credits.
The evidence that we've got before us today has crashed Green Wall Street. Let's get back to actually protecting the environment, doing what needs to happen.
The government announced it would extend a Senate inquiry examining the bill until November. as well as announcing an audit of existing offset schemes.
Well, we've extended the inquiry because the Senate committee asked us to. It is extraordinary. We're offering an opportunity for hundreds of millions of additional dollars to go into environment protection and restoration, and the Greens don't support it. We're proposing a scheme where farmers can benefit from protecting and preserving land on their farms, and the Nationals, despite saying that this was their idea in the first place, now seem not to support it.
The government now has its work cut out for it between now and November, persuading others in the parliament that both landholders and the environment can be real winners from the scheme.